Santi, good afternoon. It is uh, afternoon on a rainy day, Monday, in the middle of the pandemic. So we are meeting each other over Zoom. And
Yes,
it's awkward because I'd love to give you a big hug.
me too.
It's been a long time.
Yes, it has.
So I know a little bit about the way you started in the Board of Education before it became the Department of Education. But could
Right.
you say a couple of words about just your history in the Department of Education?
Okay, I am currently the student support manager for 26 high schools in the Michael Alcoff Superintendency. I support them with occurrences and issues in school. I also teach staff, whether it's teachers, administrators, or school aides, paraprofessionals, how to do restorative practices through Morningside
Oh,
work.
okay.
And I also am certified and do a lot of training on therapeutic crisis intervention. So a lot of it is back to what we did at Central Park East. Just that Cornell University coined it and named it something.
Mhm.
So before I was doing that, I was at DeWitt Clinton High School for 3 years. Before that, I
Wait,
had
you were
left
at DeWitt Clinton High School, not as a
as a
student,
principal.
as the principal, yeah.
As a principal for 3 years. I returned to the New York City Department of Education to be principal of DeWitt Clinton. I had left in whatever year it was to be vice president of the East Coast of the United States for Cambridge Education, which is a global for-profit organization based out of Cambridge in the UK.
Oh,
My job was to oversee the school improvement grants and the implementation for all of these schools in the East Coast. I had schools from Boston all the way to Florida, and a lot of my work was in Virginia. So that was interesting. I learned a lot there. Before that, I was deputy chancellor in the New York City Department of Education for teaching and learning and for community engagement. That was for about 2.5 years. Before that, I was the senior supervising superintendent. I oversaw the 46 superintendents in the city, and also the rating for all 1,700 plus principals in the city. Before that, I was the person responsible for overseeing the quality reviews in the city of New York.
so let's wait. Your resume must be about 25 pages long.
It's going to be, no, I condensed it to one. And before that, I was, what was I? I was a local instructional superintendent for 14 schools, including Central Park East 1 Elementary School, Central Park East Middle School, and Central Park East Secondary School, which were 3 different schools when I got there
Yeah,
as the
unfortunately.
superintendent.
Hmm.
And before that, I founded 2 different high schools, the Academy for Careers in Sports and Banana Kelly High School. And I also phased out South Bronx High School, and I was the founding assistant principal of Eastside Community High School, which started in 1992. And before that, I was at Central Park East.
Wait, with East
With
Side,
Jill and
with Jill Herman? Or,
Marion, yeah.
okay.
And I was at City College of New York from 1983 to like 1994, doing my bachelor's and my master's, my first master's, and I was placed at Central Park East 1 Elementary School, and it completely changed my life and my trajectory. So I always said everything I learned at CPU 1.
Maybe, but you also said you learned a lot at City College at the Workshop Center, and I started to ask you about that, and you told us
Yes.
about your experiences there.
So I have a bachelor's degree, I have 2 master's degree, and a bunch of other courses that I've taken at Stanford University on leadership and different things.
Mhm.
And the best course that I've taken in my life is the Summer Institute at the Workshop Center with Henny Wong at City College of New York. And the reason why I say it's the best course is that I was able to I learned what inquiry was. Even though I was at Central Park East already, we went for a walk at the park, Morningside Park, behind City College, and we just walked. And they just told us, just observe. So we observed. And at that time, they were also doing the water main pipe on Convent Avenue. So that included the walk. So we just observed everything and anything. And then when we came back into the classroom, they said, okay, so what do you want to study for the rest of this class? And I was like, what? So I remember I found it interesting that trees grew on a plum, even on a hill. So that little question, why the trees grow in a plum against any grade, whether it was a big incline or a small incline, led me to doing observations of buildings and how a building built in an incline. So I went down to Riverside. I went uptown where some of the buildings are built on stilts for maybe 10 stories high, but the front of the building is, ground level in Haven Street, I think it's called. And yet, if you look out the back window of the building, you're like 20 stories high. I learned how to develop film at the workshop center, and you learn to just play with different materials to answer questions. And that was, I think, one of the things that helped me become recognized a lot for the work that I did. Because I was like a kid. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. What does this do if we do this to it? And I brought that to my classroom. And that's what people saw. The enthusiasm of a big kid like me, learning in a place that had everything around it, from pulleys, magnets, electrical stuff, anything you could name, it was in the workshop center. And I remember even after I had the course, I would go there just to try out different things that I would try out in my classroom.
So, I remember the pond water and
yes,
Henny's pond water and also the gerbil tanks.
The gerbil tanks that people call mice and were running around there. Yes, remember it well.
Yeah, and I don't know if you ran into the Madagascar cockroaches, but those.
Yes, we did. We did. We had those as well. That was not my most favorite tank, but yes, we had those. And we had mealworms. Mm-hmm. We had so many different live organisms in the western part of the room. Because if you remember, the room was enormous. It had multiple spaces that served different purpose. And one of them was where all the live organisms, from plants to gerbils to the cockroaches to the worms, to the mealworms and different things, because we were able to do experiments on whatever we wanted. And in that institute, some of the kids, some of the students, and I'm calling myself a kid then because I feel I was, we had questions and we were able to experiment there at the workshop center. But to me, the beauty was that I was able to bring that back to the classroom. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember setting up a electricity center at the kindergarten first grade class when I was doing my student teaching under Pamela Cushing's class, Pam, and we were doing the creepy crawler curriculum, and this was weeks that the electrical stuff was there, and one kid, David, decided that he wanted to do a firefly, and Lord and behold, not only did he build his firefly with a box of Cheerios, some cellophane paper, but a firefly that actually lit up. He was able to connect the bulb to the wires, and underneath the Cheerios box, he had aluminum foil. So with his thumbs, as he was holding the box, he was able to touch the aluminum foil, and it lit up. Everybody in that classroom was like, whoa! And this was a first grader. This was a first grader. It was pretty impressive. But all of that was because I learned in the workshop center that all you have to do is expose the kids to the materials and let them experiment, obviously in a safe way, so that they could see what could happen with the different materials that we had available in the classroom.
Sure. A lot of people think that this kind of teaching, open classroom, is loose and unstructured. And just listening to your description, I'd love to hear more about the structure that underlies some of this teaching. I know that in the workshop center, like you just said, there were defined areas and things were in different places where you could find them and work with them. And and use them in different ways.
Well, that's the beauty about the so-called non-structured. You actually have to plan a lot more in advance than in a traditional classroom. And what happens there is that you come up with a unit that you want to do, and you want to be able to have the kids work in different areas, but it all leads to one thing. So, for example, with the creepy crawler curriculum, we started by going to Central Park with a tin can of Bustelo coffee and a spork. Every kid went with a spork and a can to Central Park. Then we just told them dig and fill it up with dirt. You come back to the classroom, you have a 20-gallon fish tank. Everybody pours their dirt in there, and then you give them magnifying glasses. What's in there? And then they discover all of these different bugs and insects, and now we have to classify them. What is it? How come this one has 8 legs and this one whatever? Then we start having those conversations. And then you tie that in with the very hungry caterpillar, with the itsy bitsy spider. And then all of a sudden, you have a curriculum going. And then you include the art, and you include them making big scale models of it. And you talk about scale, you talk about math. How many times bigger is the caterpillar that we have hanging over our heads than the caterpillar that we see here in the tank? The electricity that I just talked to you about, and how this kid was able to introduce that into the model that he made. So it really takes a lot more planning. I remember getting home because this was my first teaching job, on a Friday, and I'll get home at 6, 7 o'clock, and I'll fall asleep till the next day and we're like, okay, I'm late for work because it's like past 10 o'clock in the morning. Because it is so exhausting when you do all of your planning, and you have to make sure that the kids are not just playing, but asking questions and being able to say, what if I do this to this? What would happen? You don't tell them.
So it changes the teacher's role. A lot of people, especially new teachers, think that their role is to provide information.
Yeah.
But you're saying you stand back and you watch, and you observe
watch
the kids.
Simple little things like you only give them primary colors, right? In the art area. So I want to make green. Okay, so how do you think we make green? I don't know either. Let's try. So you start squeezing the paint bottle into a palette, you start mixing, and oh my God. Hi, Yvonne.
How are you? Oh my goodness. Where did you get that gray hair?
Oh my goodness, I can name them.
I have so many, I can't. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, I will tell you. I think I got the gray hairs from the adults though.
Yeah, right.
Not from the kids. Wonderful to see you.
It's good to see you.
Take care.
We're going to have to edit some of this.
That's fine. But going back into just the mixing of the colors, something that seems very simple, but you would never know that mixing 2 colors will give you green, right? But let the kids experience that, and they could talk about it. One of the best conversations that we had in the kindergarten first grade class, in Pam's class, was that we had all the animals there, right? We had snakes, we had guinea pigs, we had gerbils, we had fish, and every weekend, every Friday, we would feed the garter snakes, and we would feed them live fish, goldfish. And the kids say, why are we killing the fish? And Pam and I just kind of sat back and let them talk about how the food chains, we eat hamburgers, we eat chicken nuggets, and the kids just had an amazing conversation. And we would just ask different little questions that would allow them to expand their thinking about what was going on with the snake and the fish. And we were able to then talk about other animals and why is a spider necessary, and spiders killing some bugs. Yeah, but it's also, building the silk. And it was just an amazing thing. This was my first year, and I'm like, wow, what an experience. And then when I went to Alice's class, I was able to,
5th, 6th grade
Alice Seleski,
at Central Park East 1.
5th and 6th grade. Actually, I went to Alice first, but I was able to see also with her Day one, we were doing Greek mythology, I think it was, and I'm a calligrapher, so she wanted every kid's name on a little board and hung up on the lights. So I was able to do that. She was impressed with my calligraphy skills. But besides that, we were able to just take that little thing and the question about why are our names up here to building the whole thing about the Greek, history of Greece. And I remember I took that a step further when I had my 4th and 5th grade class at Central Park East. I actually did two things with mythology, and one of them was we created a planetarium. I don't know if your class came down to our class, but we did it with the constellations and what are the signs. You're a Libra, you're a Capricorn, you're whatever. So they had to learn the myth behind the sign. Mm-hmm. They had to use a soldering iron, electrical lights, light bulbs and bulbs, and make in a wooden plaque the constellation. So we had a circle with desks. The kids stood up on their desks, and the younger classes would come and sit in the middle of that circle. We turned off all the lights, and we would light up one constellation at a time, and the kids would say the myth behind it. And it was amazing because some of the little kids, Yvonne's class went there, I'm sure, were like, we went to the planetarium today, and it was done with kids. But then we went on and talked about games that are in these different places in the world. And till this day, I always remember that all the different games that we learned about, the kids cheered each other on when it was individual games. When they were team games, they were a little bit more harsh with each other because they're like, oh, you don't know how to do this, so that's the reason why we're losing, because you whatever. And it was amazing. But again, it's just going back to this one single idea that you could expand in so many different ways, that you can make one question, one essential question, become the foundation for a curriculum that could last for as long as you really want it to, as long as you continue to give additional questions related to that essential question that would expand their knowledge about whatever the topic was. And that was one of the things that I, till the very end, and I'm sure that if I look at my books here, then, Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe took all of that and made it into, what's the name of it?
Working backwards from...
Yeah, working backwards. And I said, they took that from CPE.
Right, yeah. I can see the effects of SPES on you, of Central Park East Secondary School, when you talk about the essential questions. But it's the kids' questions. I mean, so often I hear teachers talk about, we're going to put up on the board the essential question, and I ask them, whose question is it?
Right.
When it's the kids' question, it's generative. It keeps generating ideas and more questions.
Correct. So a perfect example of that is, as Deputy Chancellor, like my first week as Deputy Chancellor, one of the events that I had to attend and speak at was at the Met. So we have PS Art in the Department of Education, and PS Art is where kids submit their artwork, all grade levels, and then it's shown in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So I'm nervous because I'm like, what am I supposed to talk about? But then I saw the kids, and the kids were by their artwork, and I just walked around and asked the kids about what their artwork was. Can they explain it? What questions do they have? What mediums did they use? All kinds of questions. So when I got up to speak, I just basically said what the kids told me. And, but it again goes back to that thing. It's like, let the kids think about why did you decide to do this piece? And why did you use those colors? Why did you use a canvas as opposed to whatever? And they have the answer. You just got to ask them.
So let's go back to the workshop center.
Yes.
As a starting point. Can you talk about that, please?
So the workshop center, I had a little bit of a taste of it in other classes that I took. At the workshop center is also where we met as when we were doing our student teaching with Sharon Hirsch, I think was my advisor. And again, as we were doing the different assignments that they asked us at the courses that we had to take, I found myself at different places in the workshop center trying to figure out what is it that we're going to do. I remember one particular one was on community, and I don't remember why, but I spent my whole time figuring that out at the workshop center. And again, I can't remember all the details. This was back in the mid 80s and late 80s. And asking questions. And then Hubert Diassi would come, ask a question and disappear, but a question that provoked thinking and exploring the workshop center even more. I can't remember going to the library at City College of New York, because every time I had an assignment, the workshop center is where I went, because it also had a library. And it had a library not just on books, but on different content areas. So I was able to do that. At the workshop center, after every class, I would go and explore the room. I remember as a teacher, I left Central Park East, went to the workshop center because I needed to do some work and for my lessons. And I see that there's a group of people there. And then I see that Henny is leading that professional development. And then when it's over, I ask Henny, those people were forced to be here, right? And he says, what do you mean? And I said, they were all looking at their watch. And they're like, yeah, this was a PD that was mandated by whomever. And I say, yeah, because when I was in the workshop center, I would always lose track of time. So you could tell who wanted to be there and who didn't, who had to be there. So I think the workshop center is what you want to create in a classroom, where the kids are not eager to hear the bell to leave, but actually have more questions that they know that if they continue to ask questions and explore, the answer's in that room, right? In those four walls or outside of those four walls, depending on what the question was. So one of the assignments that I remember, well, the same assignment with the inquiry class in the Summer Institute, as I told you, how does a tree grow on a plum? So I wanted to know how deep, or what was the degree of the downgrade from Amsterdam Avenue to Riverside, but I didn't have any tools. So what I did is that I squatted down, I looked straight ahead, and I pinpointed a spot on a building. So I walked all the way down, counting the cement blocks, how many, and there were about, I think they're 4 feet long each. So I counted how many blocks there was, and then I counted the bricks from the bottom to the top. So that gave me the height, it gave me a hypotenuse, and then I could use the Pythagorean theory to figure out the angle, and I did. And I remember being so excited because it was the first time as a math teacher when I was in the secondary school that I actually had to use the Pythagorean theory in real life. But it was because of the workshop center allowing you to try to figure things out. And then from there, we had to figure out how come we have this downgrade. So it got me to tectonic plates. It got me to erosion. It got me to all kinds of things of how did that downgrade happen? Is it just geography, or how did we get this whatever 150-foot drop from Amsterdam Avenue to Riverside, whatever the number is? But it's, again, then you got to do a little bit more digging, right? And that's what the workshop center did for me, which continues in my job today, right? I constantly ask questions about why is this happening and how did this get to be where it is now. So
it sounds like there's a different conception of what curriculum is. So many times I hear teachers talk about covering the material, so that there's a concept that the material that you're going to teach kids is finite, and you're going to deliver it to kids, and then you're going to ask them questions about what you've told them. But you're giving me a whole different approach.
No, and that's one of the things that annoys me with my own kids. I have 3 children, and when they have this set curriculum, these, even as a superintendent, that you have whatever the curriculum was, whatever the chancellor was, that on a particular day you had to be at a particular lesson on a particular page. That's so artificial. That's not how the world works, right? So it's more about how do I best learn. And my middle son, who's dyslexic, is hated school because everything has to be a certain way, and the way he sees the world is a little bit different. Today he started in an apprenticeship for the IATSE, which is the theater union, And today he learned how to drive a forklift, whatever lift, and a whatever lift. He came home so excited today that he's been taking an online course for Bergen Community College. Hated it. Every day he's like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know what relevant does this have. But today he came home so excited. He showed me his certificate that he's now a certified operator of these particular lifts. Right? But it's different ones, right? But it's like, and now he has a bunch of questions, and he can't wait to go back tomorrow where they're going to be learning different things, because if he is going to be working, he wants to be a sound engineer, right? So he's going to be working the Prudential Center here in New Jersey. And when a band comes and they have their own equipment, how do you get those speakers up on the rafters? You got to lift them with these things. And it just connects the world that he's been doing at his high school and junior high school to the real world. So it's about taking what a kid is interested in and allowing them to explore in many different ways, which was, again, going back to Central Park East Secondary School, through the portfolio system, the kids learn what they wanted to learn in certain instances. And one of my kids, Raymond Sanchez, I don't know if you remember him,
Sure.
he wanted to know about refrigerators. Now, what do I know about refrigerators? He keeps the food cold. That's all I know. But he had to figure out, how does it work? So I used to work at Howard Ocean and Trimming Company downtown on Essex Street. And I remember on Ludlow or Ocean Street, wherever it was, they had a refrigerator shop that they would repair refrigerators. So I asked the guy, can I bring one of my students? He wants to learn how to do this. I brought Raymond after school one day, and the guy had a foam cooler, made 2 holes. He had the copper wiring, showed him how it gets coiled. He had a freezer, whatever bottle. He turned that on, and we were able to get that cooler down to like 40 degrees or 38 degrees or something like that. But he learned everything about condensation and how that Freon, whatever, goes through all that and holds, right?
That Freon that's killing our ozone, but that's okay.
But at that time, it was just about how does a refrigerator work.
Sure.
And he was able to learn about that through doing, not by reading it on a book or anything else like that. But the man was able to show him how to do the soldering on the copper and all of these different things. And the Freon's killing the world. But at that time, and actually, I don't think they sell Freon like they used to anymore, right?
No, they don't.
So,
and if you use it, it has to be sealed in a certain way, so it can't escape into the atmosphere.
Right. So that was one of the things that I think, again, Raymond enjoyed, that we were able to take a train ride down to the Soho and learn about something he wanted to learn about. And it wasn't confined to the 4 walls of Central Park East. So, but it goes back to the workshop center. My work at the workshop center was Washington Heights and those buildings on stilts. It was Amsterdam Avenue on 137th Street going down to Riverside. It was the park. It was all the places, and it was the dark room to learn how to develop the film of the pictures that I took, right? All of these places that I needed to go in order to really understand this one question that I started with. But that one question led to so many other questions and so much more learning for myself during that process. And I think that that's what sold me when I became a teacher and an assistant principal and principal. I always want to have project-based learning where there is no one set answer, but there's multiple ways to go about approaching a particular problem, a particular question, and it may give you several different answers, and that's okay.
That's okay.
As long as you're able to follow that train of thought and be able to say, okay, this didn't quite work because X, Y, and Z. I have to make sure that I don't do that again, but let's do this because I know that this gave me a better result, right? So that's the learning that I think is missing in most schools, because it's all about the book and about getting the right answer and moving on to the next chapter, because you got to cover the material within a particular time frame.
Yeah. A couple thoughts. Lillian Weber went to England, came back, and talked about what was wrong, she said, with classrooms in the United States, and in New York, I guess in particular, was that they're barren, that all the learning comes from hearing teachers talk. We're reading, a book and then,
Right.
But she said one of the things that we need to do is create rich environments for children to explore in. And so that was part of, I think, the impetus to create the workshop center. While you're talking, I'm thinking, it goes back in so many ways to bringing the outside world into the classroom and bringing the classroom into the outside world.
Right.
And so I'm thinking about now, and this is probably way off topic, but we're living in a situation where we don't know if school's going to open in the fall in the way we've been accustomed to schools
Right.
opening. And so I'm thinking, one of the things that I'm not in favor of distance learning by any means, but one of the things that it opens up is that you see children or students, whatever age, in their homes. So you
Right.
get a sense of where they live and who they live with and background and who supports them and so on. It's not an equitable situation because some kids have access to
Right.
internet and so on, and some kids don't. And that's often the result of where you live and who you are. And that's a real problem that the Department of Education isn't really dealing with. But it expands the way we see our kids, number one. And number two, it really says that learning doesn't just happen in a classroom. How do we create a situation that kind of bridges home and school?
Yes, that's something that the other day when I was watching the video with Debbie, or listening to the podcast.
Meyer, yeah.
Yeah, Deborah Meyer. And I remember her talking about how it's not a parent-teacher conference, it's a family conference. And I think that that's one of the things that has allowed us to see kids differently.
Yep.
And how that connects to people who have never done that, right?
Yep.
At Central Park Keys, we always had the family come in, and the kid always had to be part of the teacher conferences, right? The family conferences. And now that I'm working at this regional enrichment center, which is a center that is open for children of first responders or essential workers, we often get siblings, and we have a bunch of siblings, and the dynamic is interesting because I get to see mom drop them off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, dad pick them up on Friday and bring them back on Monday because the kids have two different households. And you get to see some of those youngsters come in very tired on Monday because there are less rules in daddy's house than in mommy's house. So just little things like that, but that's important for us to know. So I actually got cots for almost anybody that wants them at that center because it's so important for them to get their sleep. And often kids get into trouble by their teachers because the teachers don't bother to figure out why is the kid tired. And again, I mentioned that part of my job is to deal with all of the incidents in school. And again, this may be a little bit off topic, but just to give you an example, a kid is sleeping in a classroom. This is a true story. The teacher tells them to get up. The kid ignores the teacher. The teacher tells them to get up again. The kid tells the teacher, leave me alone. I'm tired. The teacher then says, you know what? I'm going to give you a 0. The kid gets up, and the teacher goes to the computer to put the 0 in, smashes the computer, breaks the computer. Now the kid gets a superintendent suspension. And I'm like, are you kidding me? How does that go from a kid who's obviously tired to you giving him first of all, what does a 0 mean? I mean, I don't even get that concept of giving a kid a 0 for sleeping. But it's that whole thing that the more you know about the kid, the more you know about the family, the better you are to support them. And even though, and I keep talking when I do the therapeutic crisis intervention and when I do the Morningside restorative practice, I said that we have all been conditioned like Pablo's dogs. Pablo's dog is that if you hear a bell, you react a certain way. And that's what our education system has become. Right? The bell rings and the kids are gone, teachers moving on to the next group or to the next content. The world doesn't work that way. And that's one of the things that I realize that we do all the time. And going back to the comment that I made earlier about the workshop center, that people are looking at their watch, when you have an environment that is not going to be based on a bell ringing and it's just giving you time to think and explore and think about whatever you're doing, time gets in the way. Bells, schedules get in the way. And I think that that's one of the issues. When I was doing my second master's, I actually wrote a proposal for a school that there would be no classes and everything would be a small community where every kid from little to the oldest gets to run the bodega, gets to run the hospital, gets to run the buses, the whatever, because they have to experience it. I mean, I remember writing that and people were like, oh yeah, that would never happen. I said, probably not, but that's what I think a school should be, a real life community where the kids get to do different things and then learn what they want to do. The reason why Ernesto, my son, wants to be a sound engineer is that their school always put on a performance, a play. And when he saw the soundboard, he was fascinated by it. So since the 4th grade, he's been doing the soundboard or learning about the soundboard. And when he got to high school, he ran the audio equipment for the entire district here in Teaneck, New Jersey, where the superintendent wanted to do a PD with all of the staff in Teaneck. My son will be the one setting up the speakers and the microphones and all of these different things, right? But it was an experience they had at a charter school that is very progressive, somewhat like Central Park East, not to that extent, but somewhere in the middle. But they were able to allow the kids those experiences. And that's how my kid, who's only 18, knows what he wants to do, right? Because he was given that opportunity when he was in elementary school.
That's a gift. And it's a wonderful teacher who can see that spark and realize that this is something that student really is interested in. And then how do we build the experience around that? We'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that happened in the workshop center. I want to go back to that.
Okay. Everybody had to do a separate inquiry project. There was one project that fascinated everybody because this one man found ants everywhere when we went to the park. So he wanted to do his whole learning on ants. And we kind of laughed like, oh yeah, that's really big deal. And what he had was 4 different 2-liter bottles of empty soda. And he connected them through tubing. He had one where he put all of the ants to begin with, and then the 3 other bottles going feeding from that one. One he put bacon in, another one he put sugar, and I forget what he put on the 3rd one. So the question was to us, to the rest of the class, where do you think the ants are going to go? We all said the sugar. We were all wrong. The ants went to the bacon. And then he thought the bacon was what was killing the ants because he found in that one tube, he had a bunch of dead ants. But what he found out was that if an ant died somewhere in the other 3 tubes, the other ants would carry that ant to this cemetery. And it was an amazing discovery just by observing and asking more questions, right? And he had other learnings with following the ants, but again, it happened because we were able to do that at the workshop center. Another one that fascinated me was the assignment was for the whole class. We were in small groups. Make a light bulb light up. I think it was 1 minute after you flipped the switch. And we then just went out and tried to do it. And we all took a totally different approach. And my group was the one that took a ball bearing that once you flip the switch, the ball bearing would go through this elaborate track and go all over the place before it went down to this place where it actually made the contact to light up the bulb. It wasn't a minute. I forget how many seconds it took, but everybody took such a different approach. And again, going back to learning, how do you explore that? There was another person who did a whole thing on a ball bouncing off the wall, and the kind of material that would produce a different angle. And he was able to do parabolas and all kinds of stuff, really more sophisticated mathematics to explain the different balls, the different sizes, the different density on the balls. I remember he had balls that were filled with air, while balls that were like sponge balls, a hard ball, a golf ball, a ping pong ball. I forget all of the different balls that he used, but he was then able to graph how throwing it, and then he needed to. So one of the questions is, how do we know you're not throwing this one harder than the other one? I can't remember how he used it to make the bounce. I think he might have let it go through a ramp, but it showed, and you learn a lot about the different materials that you would use depending on what game you were going to play, whatever it was. So it was just a constant questions, and I forget how big the class was, but every single project was so different that if you would take each one of those projects and bring it to a classroom, regardless the grade, you could probably have a good 2 to 3 month unit based on the different projects that we developed as students at the workshop center.
So let me just ask things or say things that are pretty obvious. One, this happened more than 30 years ago.
Yes.
And you're describing it as if it happened yesterday.
Because it stays with you, man. It stays with you. When you observe something like that, it stays with you.
But these were another obvious. These were other people's questions. Projects. These were other people's projects.
Yes.
You were busy doing your own project.
Yes. But we had to present to each other.
Okay, and you're doing it in a public place where it's open and where you have the opportunity to see and ask questions on an ongoing basis.
So when I would come back from my walks to find out the different angles and stuff, I would see this guy on the floor bouncing a ball. So I would sit down on the floor with him and like, what are you doing? Are you going to be able to really present something? Because I didn't think so, because it's just a ball, right? Yeah. I play baseball. I mean, you throw the ball, it's going to happen. You hit the ball, something's going to happen. But he took it to a different level, and being able to graph it and show the different things was amazing. The one with the ant was, again, totally amazing. I remember he did something about the weight that they were able to do, and and we all know that ants are able to lift a lot more than their own weight. And why is that possible? He answered that question. I can't remember that. There was another guy who did bubbles, and different kinds of bubbles, and the amount of detergent or whatever it was that he used to make the bubbles, and how that impacted the number of bubbles, and how much harder it was to pop the bubble. But again, who would think about that, right? When we just take a bubble maker and bubbles fly and the kids will pop them.
So who would think about it, to me, is a really important question.
Okay.
Because it in a way, it sounds like it's coming out of thin air, but we know it doesn't come out of thin air.
No, it's a lot of thinking, and I'm wondering, why does this happen versus another? But that's what the kids are always asking all these questions. And if it doesn't fit in the curriculum, the teachers don't even answer it, right? Or don't even give it, don't even encourage the kids to explore why that's happening, right? Because we got to get where Pablo's dogs. Remember, bell rings for the next day, right? But it's not giving them that time. I also say, like, when the kids have a conflict and we got to do mediation, our mediation doesn't get solved immediately. It may take a long time, but a lot of times the reasons why incidents continue to happen in schools is that if you and I had an argument and the teacher sits down with us and tries to get us to work it out and the bell rings, that teacher has to go. Yeah. And we didn't really resolve it, but the teacher may say something like, all right, are we good? Are we good? Yeah, you good? Okay, let's go. Yeah. It's the same thing with learning. The same thing with learning. You may have been in the middle of a question or really like curious part of whatever exploration you were doing, and then the bell rings and you got to forget about it because now you got to do something else. And I think that that's what the part of what we were able to do in the workshop center, that it was uninterrupted. And I often remember that they had to tell us more than once to gather up when we needed to debrief. Right. Because we would all be doing our own thing, and a lot of us would go back to what we were doing even after the end of class debrief. Because unfortunately, they also had to have the time period, right? That it started at a certain time, it ended at a certain time. But it wasn't just during the Summer Institute, it was the other classes that we had that we would
And you
have
could
to
put
stop
your
doing what we're
materials
doing.
away. You could put them to the side, and you knew where you wanted to pick up when you came back
Yes.
to it. So
And there was also space for you to store your projects so that you could come back to it.
yeah, so
Many schools
physical
don't have
space.
that luxury.
No, physical space is really
Yeah.
important, and having appropriate materials that can lead to the kinds of investigations, the kind of
Right.
queries that you're looking at. But I want to go
That's
back
why
to
you go to your room and steal your manipulatives when I was teaching at CP1.
I would gladly lend them.
I know.
So you mentioned Hubert Diassi and how he would come in and ask a question. So I want to know more about that, because to me, there's a lot to that.
Yes. So in the workshop center, you're pretty much left alone to do whatever inquiry project you're working on. And Hubert, who was never my professor,
Mhm.
will come in, wander around. Oh, Santi, what are you working on? I would tell him. And then whatever it was. So what would happen? So when I was doing the developing of the film, he comes into the dark room. And I remember I wasn't happy. And he's the one that taught me how to, what if you put a piece of paper over the paper and every 10 seconds you move it an inch or so, and then you get the different degrees of gray and blacks. So you could get from very dark to very light. But he came in, what if you do that? And then he walked away, right? I didn't see him again that day. And then I'm like, oh, that's how you know. So now I, as the person who's trying to develop the film, I know how long I have to expose the film in order to get the image that I want to get, right? Mm-hmm. And depending on what you're taking photographs of, you may want it more exposed because there's some details that you want to show, or something a little bit darker because you want to create a particular feel to the photograph. Mm-hmm. So then I go back and then I have the conversation with Hubert. So why exactly is that? So the more light that goes into exposing, the brighter it's going to be, But I didn't know that, right? Mm-hmm. But he made that little suggestion. While I was doing that same project, I can't remember exact questions, but I always remember just kind of like sometimes getting upset with him, like, really? You like took me on a totally different direction? You know, like I was, like I had my thesis, right? My theory, and I was going to prove it one way or another. Here comes Hubert, ask me the questions. I'm annoyed at him, but then I try to answer his question. And like, oh, snap. That kind of works. So I would then go back to talk to him about it, because obviously he knew the answer, right? Yeah. But he wouldn't tell me that. He would just ask the question that, even though it led me to a different channel of thinking than what I had previously, it put me in a way to find out something that he thought was also important, that I would find important as well. So that's what he did for me. Again, not being my professor, but I always remember him coming in and out. And to me, he was like a professor, but not necessarily for the course that I was in.
There just seems to be, in underlying all this, a different aspect of what a teacher is, a different feel for what the interaction between teacher and student is.
So the National School Reform, I don't know if you remember who they are. They're the ones that do the protocols, right?
Yeah.
So I became certified as a facilitator. And I remember the paper I wrote was that real teachers are not teachers, they're facilitators. They ask the right questions that spike the curiosity of the student in order for the student to do their own learning. And since then on, I always say, you know, I'm not a teacher, I'm a facilitator. I ask the questions, I don't give the answers, and I don't tell you how to get that answer, but I facilitate that. And you think about it, and that's what we do in a classroom. Mm-hmm. We're facilitators if we're good teachers. Because anybody can go up there and spew facts, but you're not necessarily teaching anything. Mm. I think if you ask the right questions, you wait enough, you pose different scenarios to kids or anybody, adults, and let them figure it out, that's teaching. Yeah. Because that's something that you could take those same, the same, whatever you call it, and apply it to different things in life, not just that particular content area, that particular assignment. these are things that you could do with anything in life. You know, it's like teaching somebody how to fish versus giving them a fish, right? If you teach them how to fish, they can fish for life.
Yeah.
But if you just tell them this is the answer, then, okay, how do I get the next fish? I can't, because I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's what I think that Hubert did for us. And that was ask the questions that taught us how to be learners for no matter what we're learning about, right? So when you think of the scientific method, that you have your theory and what's gonna happen, and you follow the different steps. I can't remember all of them, but I think it's 5 in the scientific method, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a process that you go through in order to learn and prove that theory right or wrong. And that process allows you to do it objectively without any bias with any particular variable, whether dependent or independent, that you're trying to force into it to prove yourself right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I think the workshop center did for me, is be able to put the scientific method and apply it in anything and everything in the world, not just in a science experiment where the kids do in their lab, right? You could use that same process in anything in life.
Mm. Well, let's stop here. Thank you, Santi.
Okay.
This is wonderful. And I'm sure I'm gonna watch this at some point and then think of all the questions I want to ask you. So maybe we can do it again.
And Bruce, that would be wonderful, because I told you, just being able to talk to you and Yvonne and think about all of these experiences that have shaped my life. And now that I'm getting closer to retirement, I think about how did I get to all of the places that I got to. Mm-hmm. And I always said is nobody makes it to a high level without the support of others. And when I think about Central Park East, you were the math guy. I mean, you were the one that I was able to go to for math materials. If I wanted anything to do with nature, I would go to Donnie.
Okay.
Right? Donnie Rocket would always anything nature was him. But to me, it was just amazing. And whenever I wanted to just see good teaching in a nice, calm environment, I would go to Yvonne.
Of course.
Because Yvonne, I don't think ever raises her voice in her life, unless to you. But that calmness, that reassurance that she gives the kids.
Yeah.
And I try to make that part of me. When Alice told me that told Mark that I was a yeller, and I realized I don't have to raise my voice to have the kids follow whatever structure we wanted them to follow.
Yeah.
So thank you for all of that and all of these memories. And I hope I used to tell anyone all the time that I will eventually teach at the workshop center. And I hope that comes to fruition, because I still have that enthusiasm that I had back then when it comes to learning. And I think that would be great for many teachers to come, so that our schools change. Because you talked about how does this whole remote learning happen? We could have kids do a lot more stuff as well at home by curious. My wife, who's a pre-K teacher, actually does that with her class when she was on. She says, okay, so I'm in the kitchen now, guys. What can you find that starts with a letter P? And let's look. And she'll be running around the kitchen. Oh, I found a pan. Can you find something with it? So the kids can explore their own environment at home, even as a pre-K kid, right? But by asking the right questions, by making it fun, exploring things. So anyway, I could go on and on and on and on and on.
We'll do it another time, okay?
All right. Bruce,
Okay.
Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Santi.